I'm Barbara DeMarco-Barrett, and this is Writers on Writing. As well as being podcast, today's show will be broadcast on YouTube with video. So if you'd rather watch than listen, search my YouTube channel, which is Barbara DeMarco-Barrett, and you'll find this show as well as a dozen other interviews. If you're a mystery reader, look for Sisters in Crime Orange County on YouTube, where I interview crime writers. Before we bring on our guest, writer Lisa Cupolo, a few words. We are coming up on the 1,000 show mark. And if you've been listening at all, I know, if you've been listening at all during the last 23 years, we've been doing a weekly show. If you've gleaned any tips that have helped you in your writing or life, consider our Patreon page at patreon.com/writersonwriting. Become a patron. For a few dollars a month, you'll be helping my co-host Marie Stone and me keep doing what we're doing, bringing great authors and agents to you every week. If you're not a podcast subscriber yet, you can find Writers on Writing wherever you get your podcasts. It's free. And if you are a subscriber, consider leaving us a review, and that'll make others find the show easier. Now on for our show. Lisa Cupolo's work has been published in the Virginia Quarterly Review, Plowshares, Narrative, the Ohio Review, so many more. Sorry, I said the Iowa. I said Ohio. I meant the Idaho Review. She has lived all over the world, but currently resides in Southern California, where she's taught fiction writing at Chapman University. Her debut collection of short stories is Have Mercy on Us, winner of the 2020 W.S. Porter Prize. I'm so happy to talk with you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Me too.
We have so much to talk about. And first, let me say that you have got to be one of the most genuine, sweetest persons on the planet. We met more than a year ago at Dorling Artists Colony in Temecula. And before we actually met, you asked me, you were going down the hill to the store, and you asked me if you could pick something up for me. I'm like, who does
Yes.
this?
I remember specifically, and you wanted rice, a certain kind of chip or something that you couldn't get.
It was those layered cookies, those quadrini or something, lemon cookies that Sprouts had.
Yes,
like,
Sprouts. And then I said, do you have wine? And then we became friends.
yeah, and we became friends. So
yeah.
a great beginning. Well,
Yeah.
Tell us about the book. I mean, I know a lot about the book, but I don't know everything about the book. And certainly a lot of our viewers and listeners know nothing yet. So how did it come about? Have Mercy on Us.
So this is a collection of stories. So I have always, not always, I've written a lot of stories. I'm always writing stories. So it came about in terms of being published because I finally thought I have enough stories. I was writing stories, and everyone I'd sort of send it out and get published, which was really lucky. I had tried agents for a novel I had, different things, and then I thought, oh, I'll just try some of these contests that they have. And the W.S. Porter Prize was sort of a big one I'd heard about, and I just kind of put my hat in the ring and was really lucky to winning. It was during the pandemic, so it was like even more exciting to have something like that happen.
To have something happen. So it was for a contest initially, and
right.
Contest, I don't know, were the stories in the same arrangement as they are in the book? And how do you arrange stories? When you're going for a contest, you don't have an agent or an editor telling you what to do and to figure it out. So what happened for the contest? How did you arrange your stories?
Well, I've had experience in publishing. I was a publicist at HarperCollins in Toronto for many years. And so I had a really good sense of how to put things in order. And my husband's also a writer, short story writer. And so I don't know how I did it, but I think I just modeled it in terms of chronology. But my stories are pretty wildly different. And I always worry about the question, what's the one thing you can say about your collection? What's it about, And I say it's about love because that's really, it's stories about love, not love, romantic love so much as love, like intense love. In every story, it's longing, it's loss, it's despair, it's there's so many emotions. And I was thinking about it today because I was out walking and thinking, what am I going to say to Barbara? What are these stories about? And I was thinking when I was a child, so I'm the youngest of 6,
Wow.
and very Italian, Canadian kind of intense family. And so when I was little, I used to say to my mom, all the time, when I'm never leaving this house, we all have to stay here forever. No one's leaving. And so I've always felt such intensity, and then that feeling of loss that we all have, and fear of losing somebody. And what happens when somebody betrays you, or all of these emotions, and how intensely you feel that. So I don't know if that's kind of a theme, but it seems to run through a lot of my stories.
I want to talk about theme, but first I just have to say your mother was a single parent, right?
Uh-huh.
And she refinanced the house, did something to put you through school?
She did, yeah. You did your homework on me. And I lived, she was the one who got me to travel. So I had lived in this very small town. Everybody was in Niagara Falls, Canada, the honeymoon capital of the world. And but it's only 70,000 people that live in this town, and 90% are Italian. But of course, immigrant Italian. So I never wanted to be Italian. Everybody was Italian, and we all wore, the hoop earrings, and you have to understand what that feeling is like. And I also didn't feel ever Canadian. And so my mother, after like 2 years of me not doing well in college, gave me the money to go on this exchange to France, where she was a real estate agent, and she had to refinance, put a second mortgage on the house to send me to a school in Nice. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life. When I got there, I literally got off the plane and I was like, oh, I'm home. I'm here. I'm home. What is this? And so that's a profound feeling, to know that you have spiritual homes. And so I was very interested in that feeling, and so I ended up living a lot of different places, I think, and that's what really gave me the education and really made me work on towards being a writer.
So interesting. So, okay, so back to theme. So all of the stories feel like they are connected thematically. And I was curious if you had to leave any out. Were there any stories that you wrote that maybe were in the collection for the contest and you had to take out, or even before that point where you went,
Yeah, good question. I always wanted it to be 10 stories. I like numbers that are, even numbers for sure. So there were 2 that I would have put in, and but I left it at 10, and those are going towards, my next book, I guess. But as far as I have 2 stories that take place in Kenya, and I don't write stories in places that I haven't spent at least a year or longer, where I really do know the background and the feel to live in a place. But yeah, there are definitely other stories I've had published that I didn't put in. This number sort of seemed to be right for me.
So what were you doing in Kenya?
I had a boyfriend who wanted to learn Swahili. We were living in Calgary at the time, and he wanted to learn Swahili. So we both were at a dead end in our whatever art jobs we were doing. So we decided to go to do volunteer work, and went to the town of Kisumu on the border of Uganda, right on Lake Victoria. And we worked at the Pillars of Faith orphanage for over a year and or so. And it was, it wasn't through an NGO or anything, because a lot of those places you kind of have to pay to do them, which is like, I had no money. So we just got tickets and went, and it ended up being another very mind-blowing experience of my life, really. I thought that I would do aid work after that, and just like, this is it. There's nothing more meaningful than this. And then of course I got back to Toronto, and I don't know, something else happened.
So interesting. Wow. So, okay. So the stories now, let's talk about a few specific stories.
Great.
specifically the first one. I read that, I think shortly after we met, you sent me the story. It was published somewhere. Was it narrative? It was somewhere.
No, it was published at Prime Number magazine,
Mhm.
which is a small magazine, and I love that magazine. And it got a pushcart nomination. That story, and it's called Felt and Left. Use the same letters. I'm actually writing a novel and stories from that story. But Felt and Left, Use the Same Letters is about this couple with their daughter who go to Greece for 2 months, like on May and June, for, just to have this amazing holiday that they've never had. They're sort of old, they're older, and their daughter is late 20s. And the husband is a famous playwright, and he's very well known. And a woman comes to the door, this Greek woman that knows of his work, and he ends up, well, and maybe you shouldn't spoil it, but something where he goes down to her atelier, and she's very much after him. And it's really told from Daria's point of view, who's the wife. And we think, oh, she's just going to be so mad at him for doing this. And she does something completely different. And I guess I'll say that about my stories is I'm always looking for something unexpected and something tender in a relationship that's got, where you're surprised, but there's also like this human connection, the bonds that, well, I don't want to lose this person. I've been with this person for a long time, but I might do something else that is going to be shocking and interesting and really make him mad, maybe. But yeah, ask me a question about what you're going to say about the story.
Well, did something specific happen to trigger the story? Like, do you remember like when you started writing it, when you had to write it, when, the story came to you, or maybe the first line, or you saw something happen? I mean, like, specifically, do you remember what happened?
We were on Catalina Island when I wrote this story, and we were staying at a place that kind of reminded me of the feel of the Greece, because it's a very idyllic, right? It's like Corfu, the show, the Durrells in Corfu. If anybody,
I love that. I
love it so much.
Loved it.
I want to say that I don't remember if the Larry Lawrence Durrell in the show, he has this gorgeous woman that he falls in love with from the town, and she struck me, and she sort of is very provocative with him, and they have this torrid romance in the show. And I think the woman that comes to the door that is enticing he's an old guy, but he's this famous American playwright. She's the person. It's her that I had somewhere in the back of my mind. So that would be where that story derived from, that character. This black, this Athenian beauty that you don't even, she doesn't even have a name, because she's so just like, she's the stereotype, right? She's the one who comes in to the relationship to destroy everything, but what's left is what's important between the two of these, this couple.
Sure. Will you read it? Read from it?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. People knew of us in that small Greek village. The well-known English writer with his family, staying up the hill at the Tortorella estate, an ancient and sturdy two-story with milky turquoise shutters and fuchsia bougainvillea cascading just so, as if heaven sent. The place was ours for 2 months' time, May and June. We were planted and living among the locals. Anthony had his feet dangling from the open window, pen in hand. He was a bearded man of innumerable and occasionally insufferable talents. I remember Louisa came into the kitchen where I was and asked, "Ma, how can I make my skin more luminous?" My daughter wanted something to give her vitality and gloss. Meanwhile, I was applying clumps of brown henna onto my dwindling strands. "This is the last time," I told my daughter. "Soon I'll go au naturel, gray." I was tired of the fuss of dyeing my hair each month. When would I knock off the facade and embrace the years, all the years that stacked up on me sideways, like shingles on a roof? Start with olive oil, I told my daughter. Add the pulp of an orange and mash some rosemary in to make a paste. Then apply it to your cheeks. Eat a spoonful of raw garlic with honey. What did I know? Upping the beauty at her age? Louisa needed not a dash of paint nor a dab of cover. Youth burst from her lush curls and delighted its way along to her springy toes. She was a child born under the lion moon. She was wearing a silk robe that stopped at her tanned thighs. I'll stop there. That's just a little bit from the beginning.
That's so great. So talk about the process of writing this. I mean, how many drafts did you go through?
A lot. I work and work and work and work and work. For this story particularly, I loved the character so much that it was so much fun to keep writing and getting it right, because she has such a voice, because she's aging, she's older. It's different for a woman to age. The husband's still attractive. It's really frustrating for women to age. Like, I feel that in my 50s, it's so different for women and men, and so, but she's got so much spunk, like you're rooting for her the entire time. She says, I'm not going to dye my hair anymore, forget it, but still she's there doing it. And then she's got this gorgeous daughter who's just, it's just wonderful, because that's life. How you see in the generations and how she shifts to being in a different place in her life. Yeah.
So I guess when I was reading it, I was wondering, I mean, your husband's a writer, you have a daughter. Were you worried at all that people would think you were writing about you?
Oh, no. I mean, if they are, great. I mean, my husband's older. He's, a lot more well-known than I am. He's still handsome, and he's like 77, and that's just, I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, of course. I mean, there's so much of me in this book. I'm in there. I'm her in, in every sense. And yet I don't do what she does, but, there's points in your life where you want to do that. So you put it in your character.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of truth in the story for me. And I think that's, honestly, it's easier to write that kind of story where it's write what you know. There's a lot that I don't know that I write, but yeah, I mean, I'm fine if people think that. They can ask me or think it's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember Michael Chabon, I talked to him a long time ago, I think right after he won the Pulitzer. And he said, we were talking about writing in the first person. And he's like, yeah, I said, are you worried about people thinking it's you? Because everybody thinks it's always the writer anyway. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're first person, third person, they still think it's about you.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I have youngest of 6. I have 5 siblings who have now finally read all these stories and asked all the questions. Was that so and so? Is that you? When and it is. It is me in a lot of ways, for sure.
Talk about endings too, because the ending of this story is so perfect, and I think endings are really difficult. I mean, endings are, difficult in short stories, novels, in life. Endings are difficult. Talk about the ending of this story, and when do you know a story is finished? Like when have you reached the ending? Like, what do you feel, or what are you looking for to know that, what, this is where it needs to end?
It takes an inner voice for me to tell me that it's happened, but also in terms of on the page, I want to make sure that things come back around. Like I start out with her daughter in the kitchen. And for
Mhm.
this particular one, because they have this nest of this lovely villa overlooking the ocean, and the husband goes down to town, and I wanted her to come back to the place with her daughter and be with her daughter again. And somehow her daughter mirrors her and shows her life and where she is now. And it's just very subtle. It's her
Mhm.
coming back and taking down the washing from the line,
Right.
like that. But there's a bit of hope because she also clips a rose. I don't know. There's part of it, and the daughter in the kitchen baking, and yeah, I just knew it was done. And you never know with a story. It's some of them, I think, oh, I could have kept writing on that.
Mm.
Where are these people now? I mean, they're all,
Right.
yeah, really, I feel like this book is very much, I find my delivery, people say, is like very staccato delivery. It's very like, you don't get extra filling in my stories. So I feel like each of them is a snapshot into a bigger world, but I've condensed it and condensed it and condensed it into this 8-page story or something. And so hopefully it stays with you and you keep wondering, oh, as I do with my characters, I wonder if they're okay now. I mean, really, who's to say that what reality and, the difference. So.
Yeah. So, with the ending, do you think that the ending should be specific enough so that the reader can imagine what comes next, or vague so that any number of things could happen next?
Every story is its own magical, sounding board for where, and it goes with how the delivery is in the way that it's written. So endings are super duper hard, so ridiculously hard to get right. And so I think that the beginning, definitely, of a story, you've got to refine and refine, but also the ending, really have to hit the right notes in making it, not this whole making sense of things, because I think so good stories just ask more questions about life, right?
Mhm.
Instead of giving some answer or getting you to a destination where, the whole family's at the dinner table again, everything's great or something.
Mhm.
So yeah, making you feel like you still have so many questions, but have some satisfaction too. Like a
Right.
little bit of a deep, okay, yeah, holding on to something.
So when did you know you wanted to use the story in a novel or turn it into a novel?
I just kept writing this character.
Um,
Daria stayed with me.
mhm.
And so I'm going to do it a novel in stories. And I've got, half of it done. So really excited about that.
I notice you write a lot of dialogue, and I love dialogue. I think, I just I love stories that are primarily dialogue. Talk about that. I mean, do you think about that in a draft? Like, is the dialogue, is it balanced with the exposition or the narrative? Or, I mean, are you thinking that way at all when you're writing?
No, I have a lot of, I don't know, everybody has voices in their head. I feel like I have a million voices in my head all the time talking. So that's why meditation is good for a writer. But I find that, yeah, I love my characters to talk to each other. It makes them real on the page. And yeah, because it really gives action to the story once you have them talking. And there's got to be some conflict. So I always find, like, when I'm reading a story, once I hear them talking, I'm like, okay, I know what they sound like. I know who they are. I'm really in their world if I know what they sound like. And maybe that's a reflection of all the reading I do, and who my influences are, maybe. But dialogue is, I've always assigned dialogue to my students. I'm always trying to go out. One of the first assignments we do is go out, luckily in the city of Orange, I teach at Chapman, that we go out to this main square and they have to record something they've heard on the way or sitting in this beautiful, where they have this fountain in the main square. And there's always like grandfathers running after kids and yelling crazy things at them. And so dialogue, I'm always aware, and I'm writing little ideas down often about dialogue.
You mentioned influences. Who are your influences?
Um,
And are you a rereader?
Okay, influences. So I'm Canadian, and I would say it's interesting growing up in Canada because so I think for me it's the big three, the Canadian big three, which are Margaret Atwood, Carol Shields, and who am I missing?
Alice Munro.
Alice Munro, the biggest one of them all, Alice Munro. But those are my three. I mean, I've read everything of all three of them. Alice Munro is yeah, Carol Shields, the book Unless, made me want to be a writer. If you've ever read talk about the dialogue is so
Yes,
good in that book.
I have that one.
Yeah, I just love her. So really steeped in Canadian literature, and then I really didn't get my education in American writers until I moved to America when I was in my mid-30s, and did my MFA. So I was really so uneducated in American literature until my late 30s. And that was really interesting and wonderful because I had all these, I mean, I didn't know Faulkner until then. I mean, it seems like a sin if you're American, but for me, I have so many obscure Canadian writers who influenced me. I mean, nobody knows who Mordecai Rickler is, but he was huge.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Duddy Kravitz and all of that. And yeah, Robertson Davies. There's so many Canadian writers that were really influential.
Well, tell me about the story Fort Pierce, Florida, because you have a character in that one based on Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes, I do.
I'm curious about this story.
Writing in the voice of Zora Neale Hurston, which goes towards, which is something I probably wouldn't do now. So when I was doing my MFA, and studying, I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and I had come from Toronto, and Toronto is the most cosmopolitan city. I mean, besides New York, Dubai, somewhere like that. And so I had no real sense until I got to Memphis, Tennessee, about the division in the real sense of when I got to Memphis, I was teaching my first class, and there were white kids on one side and black kids on the other. And there was nothing else in between. There were no Chinese kids. There were no, everything I'd been used to. So it was a real culture shock and so I just got so into African-American literature, and really I should have done, my MFA in that as well, because, or my master's, because I had studied so much and I could have stayed and done it. But so I was reading Zora Neale Hurston and loving everything that I was reading. And I was just so in it and immersed. And when I learned that she had spent time as a maid in Florida, and this, and be near the end of her life, I had this idea, well, what if she was doing, working in this maid, and she walked in and there was this person who was being a writer in this motel, and they had no idea who she was. And of course, it's this young white writer who thinks he's all that, and he's drinking his bourbon because he wants to be Hemingway or whatever. And so yeah, it's the most unique story, I think, in the collection.
I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Z House too. That one has stayed with me, and I'm not sure why exactly. I think part of it has to do with the visuals, because I keep picturing this Z House where, one character lives on one end and the other character lives in the other end, and then a son comes to stay and lives in the middle. Talk about that story and where that came from.
Okay, yeah. I had a friend who was, again, she was divorced, older, maybe in her 60s, and she and her best friend had this idea to live together, pool their money, buy a great piece of land, and they were still like foxy and going out and doing everything, and they had dates and whatever, but they wanted to live together, and they were going to do it in the perfect, environmentally way of their house, set it up in the, breezeways and all this with the, and it sounded ideal. right? And in the middle, they would have, it was done like a Z, and in the middle would be the common room, and they would each have their wing with a little garden and area to sit and have, it's just like, sounds like perfection to me. And so, and it was for these two women, they had a blast. They'd come in, they'd have their meals together, but had basically their own separate lives. And then one of their sons comes to the door, basically with his pillow, because he's been kicked out from his wife, and then the story begins, right? When they have this person in the middle of them, and that's how that story. Because I love the idea of having these two women, but you have to have trouble in a story. So where does the trouble come from? And so I'm thinking, well, what's going to happen? Because it sounds too perfect, and it just went from there. You have somebody show up at the door. That's one of my writing exercises for students too. Imagine, somebody's at the other end of the door that you're afraid to open it, but you open it anyway. And who is that person? And then start writing. And so, yeah, I love that story too. I think it's really, you get all sides to the characters, and she's one, Jeannie and Paula, and Paula's the one who's, really tender in that story and is very afraid as a woman to like make her mark and sort of live outside of her ex-husband's, past sort of thing. So, yeah.
I wondered as I was reading that, well, as I was, when I'm reading anything, I suppose, like, well, you talked about the women that who did this. Did you take anything from what from what happened with their lives? I mean, did a son show up or a daughter show up, or it was just really the situation? It was just coming together to have a house.
Well, what happened is they ended up in real life that they made the house, and then the other one ended up not moving in and pulled up and moved out to Prince Edward Island in Canada. So, I mean, it's, these disasters and ways of coming together, it was a dream. And so, but I was very happy that they got there. And it's one of the son that comes ends up being hot for the other woman, which is, I didn't know that was going to happen either. Yeah.
I notice also, and I talk about this in my classes a lot, when you're writing a short story, like limit the characters, limit the settings, limit the problems, and you're not going to have a million subplots in a short story. And your stories are limited in setting and number of characters and what, the major problem. There tends to be little things going on, but there's a problem and not a lot of stuff. Will you talk about that? I mean, do you, in your early drafts, do you ever overwrite what's happening and you're going to have to cut it later and you cut it later? Or do you go into writing a story knowing I'm only going to have a couple characters, I'm only going to have a couple settings at most, and this is the A story and maybe the B story? I mean, how much do you know going in?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know a ton. I usually have to make the B story up, because I that's what I have to work on as a writer. I feel like we all have. I'm aware of. I'm not great at settings, right? Like making, describing a setting the way it is, But the character. Oh, thank you.
Wonderfully. They're minimal and enough.
They're minimal, yeah.
But enough to give the reader, to give me an idea of what you're doing or where they are.
Thank you. So I think that the story of the linear story, I find character is what I get driven by, and I'm writing about the character. And I think, well, there's got to be other people that are interacting. Now put that person in the scene and see what happens. So I don't end up writing big, a lot of things happening. I'm very much narrow in, this is the scene, this is the problem, because I feel like if you spread it out too much, that's a novel, or it's some other beast that isn't a short story. So I'm very aware all the time of getting the problem on the page first. It's very important in a short story to know the trouble is there within the first 2 paragraphs. I think for me, that's how I like to write, the story I have, How I Became a Banker. The first line is, I knew when I was 13 that I wanted to make a shitload of money. And that line I love, because you have to think, well, obviously you've had something happen with money or your life or what, now I want to know about your childhood. Okay, what happened? And so there's already the trouble in that. It's there. And the story is called How I Became a Banker. So we know she's a banker and she hates being a banker, but she was not going to not, earn a shitload of money.
Right. But getting it there on that first page in the first couple of paragraphs, it's a short story, right? It has to happen.
Yes,
quick.
it has to happen. It has to happen. And when you know this from being a teaching so much, is you're often taking the first 2 pages for a student, saying, okay, the story starts here. You don't need these first 2 pages,
Right.
right?
You don't need
Yeah. Where you
Are-
get the
Yeah.
sorry.
Were there any stories in the book that were difficult, especially difficult? Or when you hit that spot, do you go, you know what, it's not worth it?
Probably how the title story, Have Mercy on Us, took me a long time to write. And I put it aside for a year almost. And so I'm not sure why some stories are like that, but I couldn't get, it's a love sort of between a mother and daughter feel to it, where the daughter's in trouble and she's got a kid, and the mother, and she's into drugs. So the mother is very protective and almost to a maniacal way, where wants to go after the boyfriend who got her in trouble. So I can't say, but a lot of times I've heard on your show people say, put the story aside, when they're giving that advice. But my advice, I would say, because I've listened to all your shows, and your podcast is my favorite podcast for writers, not just because I know you now and we're friends, but I would say in terms of advice, or to make what I'm always trying to find when I read a story, in a student story or work that's not there yet, is you don't quite have the voice yet. And so rewrite this as if you're writing to your best friend. Rewrite this as to the person who accepts you most in the world. And you can be as honest and clear and vulnerable on the page. Write to that person. Write the story as if you were telling it to them. And that often helps. I mean, I have a million tips for, just from being in so many different, teaching so many different classes, but also another one that helps, I guess, again, it's a form of point of view, is if you got it in first person, well, rewrite it, word for word, and put it in third person. You probably heard that. And then if it's in third person, rewrite it word for word in first person. And man, you learn so much about the character when you change that point of view. It's pretty astonishing.
What about in taking a short story and turning it into a novel? Like, what did you have to deal with? I mean, you're talking about your novel as interconnected stories. So I don't know, maybe that's a little different, but you're still taking an existing story and you're creating a book, right? So did you find that, I don't know, things about these characters change because now they're going to be in a book? They're going to have a long lifespan?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to really get more into what they do for a living, for instance, if they're characters that are in that, and what happens, what's the interaction in their day. I find the dailiness, which you never really want to put on the page, but you have to have that, because you need to be, for the story I'm writing right now, it's very much like that. Now I know they're back in Toronto after they've had this big trip, and it's just a Tuesday in October, but the story's still going along. So that's what I love about a novel versus a short story. You're really just in their house with them on a regular day and figuring, keeping them company, and they're keeping you company. It's the coolest thing. And with short stories, you don't get that as much. It's a quick, whoa, like, whoosh, and then it's gone.
And then it's gone.
Yeah.
You mentioned, you've mentioned different exercises or assignments you've done with students. And I'm curious, I don't know, this might be a strange question, but I always like to ask writing instructors this question, and that is, how do you teach writing? I mean, do you find that students either have it or they don't, or can they get it by learning the craft? Do you know what I mean? Like there are people who want to be musicians who can't are tone deaf.
Yes.
They're never going to do what maybe they would love to do. Do you ever find that with writers, with students, or is it different because it's more craft or, well, I mean, all of the arts, you have to learn the craft of it.
And luckily it's so beautiful to be a writer, because you can learn by reading, and that's the most pleasurable thing to do. If you love writing, I just assume you're going to be a heavy reader and just be really into it. And I really feel like it seeps into your pores, and then it comes out and sleeps into your pores. And rarely do I go, okay, I'm going to learn how to read a short story, so here's Chekhov, and I'm going to read Gooseberries, and I'm going to figure out word for word what he did. At least I don't learn that way. I learned by reading Gooseberries like 15 times and going, oh, and enjoying it every time I read it. So a student has to be ready. I have a lot of students that are in their 20s, are not sure, they don't, if you're dedicated, if this is your passion, this is what you want to do, I think you'll get there. I mean, it took me that's why a lot of writers are older. It takes a while to mature and get to, where you've ingested enough and lived enough, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But I have a few nerdy questions for you. And that is, writing first drafts. Do you use paper and pen? Do you use typewriters? At what point do you put it on the computer? And then when you do, what are you using? Are you on Word or Scrivener? And do you have a special font that you like? And point size, all the nerdy stuff.
Okay. Garamond 12, I like. I do a lot of writing in the morning, just longhand. And then I will, put it on. I don't have a Mac. I just have like a regular laptop, and I use that. But I get my best inspiration in the morning for writing early. And you can be really wild in the morning. People think you get wild at night. In the morning is like wild time, because no one's up and it's quiet and everything.
How early are you talking about?
Like 5. I mean, not too early. Yeah. But it's just so brilliant because no one's awake and you have the whole place to yourself. So did I answer? I don't use a typewriter. I wish I did. That would be really cool, but I don't.
So you go directly onto the laptop, no longhand kind of legal pad drafts or?
No, nothing like that. You do all those wonderful things, I think. But the thing too with writing is I came to it. I mean, I was always writing things, but I never was any good. I mean, I dated a writer for 7 years, and this is before my husband, who was a writer, and he was so good, and he was very fancy, and he'd been to Oxford and all that. And I was living in France at the time. And I had just so come from working class. I mean, my upbringing was not literary based. We didn't have a library. We didn't, my mom read books, but I really think that what your purpose is comes to find you. Like it just kept coming up for me. You better write this down. I mean, I had a million jobs because I had to. But writing it's in you. So maybe back to that other question about, if you're born a writer, it's going to find you. And it just keeps, it keeps saying, hello, do this thing, because then you feel nurtured, and it's just the best feeling. And so, yeah, I mean, not to say that you have to do an MFA, or like I was pregnant when I did my MFA. I was 35, none of my trajectory was first class or anything like that. You just come to it however you come to it.
Right. Well, we have to talk about publicity, because You were a publicist. I was a publicist a long time ago. How is that transferring for you with your book? Like, what are you getting involved in, or how are you directing your publicists? Or I don't know, just, are you finding anything really useful in terms of getting the word out?
It's really hard when it's yourself.
Mhm.
I'm a great cheerleader for everybody in my life, and I'm not good at doing it for my own stuff. So it's really like, oh, would you read my kind of blurbs? Was really hard. Um, so I'm a terrible publicist for myself. But I have a publicist, which is great, and she is great. But yeah, it's difficult. I loved doing publicity for other people when I was in Toronto, and I had made great friends with writers. But I have a really, yeah, it's probably just a confidence thing or something, but it's not fun.
It's not.
Right? But it's necessary. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it can feel like a lot of hype and you just go, oh, what's the point?
Hmm.
Like, why
Yeah.
bother? I don't want to bother people. Yeah, it
Right.
is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But what about, there was something I was going to ask you in relation to that. Like Goodreads. You're using Goodreads, right?
So yes, so my book's not out till January 24th. Um, but right now I'm doing a giveaway on Goodreads. If anybody is on Goodreads and you put it on your shelf, have mercy on us. It's yeah, I'm giving away 4 books. So that's fun. So I do go on Goodreads and I do post more recently, of course, since I've been having to do this, but I think it's a neat platform. I'm not great at social media, but I'm pushing myself to be better.
And let's talk about pre-orders, because publishers always love to see those pre-orders come in, and so do writers, because I guess it determines the first printing. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that. I guess I'm not sure what my print run is. See, I'm terrible at it.
Well, your pub date is January 24th, and
Correct.
this will most likely be on YouTube, close to today, which is December 9th. Um, so, so if people see this, readers see this, it'd be great for them to pre-order, right? I mean,
Would
you
be
can say that,
amazing.
right?
Yeah. Through Regal House Press. You can look me up, Lisa Cupolo. And I have a website, lisacupolo.com, where you can see, where to pre-order. Would be fantastic. And
Yeah.
I'd be very grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it counts more than I think people know. When you become, that writer who has something coming out, you become very aware of how pre-orders are important.
Yes.
At least from the
Mhm.
publisher's point of view.
Right.
Well, before we go, how about, I know you already gave a bunch of tips, but if you want to leave the watchers and listeners with something to remember about writing, some advice or pearls of wisdom, what would you say?
Okay. I would say to just follow your heart and don't worry, don't ask too many questions about should it be one way or another, because the story that you have to tell is your unique story and nobody else on the planet can tell it like you can. And that is so valuable and worthy. And don't worry what keep going with feels right in your heart. And honestly, that will lead you and you'll find your way. So.
Well, thank you. This has been just wonderful having you on. And
Thank
I
you, Barbara.
can't wait for your book to be out and to see what happens with it. And I'm sure all good things. You've got wonderful blurbs on here, by
Thank
the
you
way.
so
You
much.
said you
I
were
do.
nervous
Yeah, I was
about asking
really,
for
really
them.
lucky. Yeah, very lucky to get,
Great.
astonishing blurbs. So thanks, Barbara. It's been a real joy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was Lisa Cupolo. Her book is Have Mercy on Us, published by Regal House. Thank you to Travis Barrett, who does our music design and has an album's worth of typewriter music on Spotify, which is free to you, and it's called Just My Type. So when you go to Spotify, look for that. If you want to get in touch with me, penonfire@earthlink.net. My website is penonfire.com. Marie Stone is at mariestone@gmail.com, and Travis Barrett Visit travisbarrettcreative@gmail.com. Thank you for listening and for watching, and have a great week. Don't forget to stay in the chair. It's the only way your story will get written. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Lisa.
Thank you, Barbara.